if you are new to acrylic pouring and you're kind of wanting to get some ideas on how to set up your workshop space, particularly your pour table, I just wanted to share some ideas and strategies that you can actually use. So when I first started working doing acrylic pouring, I basically had a grid that I have silicone mats underneath that catches all the paint that pours through, and then I have this grid system where I I put a painting down, pour on it, and then the moment and because this is reasonably long, once I'd finished pouring, I would cover my work. Usually I would basically just use these little aluminium foil trays to cover my work and let it dry pretty much overnight. And then I would move it. I have a drying rack. I would then move the work onto a drying rack and keep it covered with these little trays until the work had been completely dried. If your work is slightly bigger than that, then say something like this, you can also, you can migrate up to the bigger trays, or alternatively what you can do, you can also use plastic containers. Something that I worked out that works better is to use see-through containers, plastic see-through containers, because you can actually see when you're putting the container down over the work. So that's one strategy that you can use, is sort of creating like a grid, getting a grid, and then you pour over the grid. Another thing you can do is you can basically get a grid, a piece, something like this. I've seen these sold in grids like this sold at Bunnings, as well as I think you can get them online. And you get a Tupperware, so the Tupperware will basically take all the drips and everything. And again, you pour over it, and once you've poured like this, you can actually then, if you want, you could move it straight out to your drying rack and cover it, or like I've done, you can actually just cover it overnight, with your silver foil or plastic container. And I tend to do that because it just allows the painting to like settle. The downside of working with this sort of grid system is, what I have found is that once you've poured a lot of paint dribbles down the sides, and once you've poured like this and it's sitting on a grid, you can't. It's quite difficult to get rid of that excess pour. So that's why I then migrated into, I sort of changed my system, which I'll share with you. Another thing you can do is basically just use cups to elevate your work. You put your work on the cups, you use a spirit level to get your work level. Probably the most important thing when you do pouring is getting your work level. It was by far the biggest headache. So you basically use a spirit level. I got this from Bunnings, not terribly expensive, and you just make sure that that little dot sits in the middle of the lines, that bubble, trying to get it even. What I actually do is I use this fridge leveler. I found this worked better for me. I put it in the center of my work, and make sure that little bubble sits right in the middle. And in the beginning, I would then sort of tweak my work until I could get it level. And I found that I ended up doing that took quite a lot of time. So I actually changed my system, which I'll show you. I moved into another system. And then, eventually I invested in a table, a leveling table, but that was actually quite an expensive investment. So I recommend that you actually just come up in the beginning, just work with some strategies that are going to work for you until you basically decide if you want to invest in a leveling table. So if your table isn't level, like mine wasn't until I invested in a level table, one of the things that I personally found with the cup thing, so firstly, why I moved from the grid system to putting my work on cups was, when you pour a painting, painting will continue to pour off the edges. So it's a really good idea to basically run your finger along the bottom of your painting to get all those drips off, because if the drips sit there, the painting will continue to pour into those drips, and basically the composition that you've got will continue to alter, because it'll just keep stretching off. So when you run your fingers along and sort of cut somewhat down cut off those drips, what you're doing is you're slowing down the pour of the painting, the paint coming off your painting. And what I would often do is come back a couple of times and just do that, because I just want to hold the paint on my painting where it is. So that's why I moved away from the grid system onto the elevated kind of cup system. But then what I found with the cup system, because my table wasn't level, is I spent an enormous amount of time trying to get my cups level, and I found that very frustrating. Just wasn't working for me. So then I basically got this idea from Gina DeLuca. So she's a really great pourer. She has a Facebook group, I think it's called Go Make Some Art. And I recommend that you look at following different pourers, because you get different ideas, different strategies. It's a really good idea. And what I did is I used these eye hooks. I got these from Bunnings. They weren't terribly expensive. I think it was a pack of 100. Maybe they were $5. I can't remember. Just want to make sure you can actually see those. Yeah, so there's the eye hooks. And what I do is I screw these right into the wood. And then I would get my fridge leveler. I don't know why I keep calling this a fridge magnet. I apologize, it's a leveler. And I would put it in the center of my work, and then I would tweak my work until I could get that bubble right into the center. And then I'd hold it down, and then I would just play with my hooks until I'd basically got it completely centered. And I found that strategy worked amazing for me, and it was quick. And then what I did find though is that the aluminium trays didn't always work so well when I was covering my work. So then I moved to see-through plastic containers to cover my work, because you will need to have a system to cover your work, because bugs and things land in your work, and it just doesn't look good with your pours. So those are some strategies that you can use to get your work level. And getting your work level when it comes to acrylic pouring is, I think, hands down probably the most important thing. If you don't get your work level, your composition will definitely change, because most of it will slide off your painting. And then another quick tip is making sure where you dry your work, your drying rack, is also level. So what I found is my drying rack has got self-adjusting feet, so it is level, but because I was using this hook system, it wouldn't be level when I put it on the drying rack. So I used to wait for my work to dry sufficiently enough that I could pull out my hooks and then just move it onto the drying rack. So these are just some tips and strategies to just help you as you start your pouring journey.